I sat at the edge of my bed, clutching an old photo album filled with snapshots of James and me throughout the years. It was supposed to bring comfort, but all I could feel was the weight of everything we'd been through. At 28, I never thought our biggest challenge would come from his mother, Sarah. She wasn't just a difficult person. Her presence cast a shadow over our relationship, leaving me questioning how much more I could endure. James had always been my high school sweetheart. His boyish charm and unwavering ambition had captivated me from the moment we met. Even when we went to colleges in different states, we managed to keep our bond strong. But even back then, Sarah loomed in the background. She had disapproved of me before we'd even met properly. I learned quickly how overbearing and fiercely protective she was of her two sons. To her, no one, especially me, was good enough. I flipped through a page in the album and stopped at a photo of a much younger James in his tuxedo. My heart clenched as I pointed to the blank space beside it. "Do you remember prom?" I asked, unable to hide the edge in my voice. James sighed deeply, sitting beside me. "I remember. Mom's Venice trip. She thought she was doing something special for me." The guilt in his tone was unmistakable, though frustration was woven into it as well. I scoffed, the memory still fresh. "Special? She planned that trip to ruin our prom date, James. You begged her to cancel it." "I was a kid," he said softly, his voice almost apologetic. "I didn't know how to stand up to her then." I closed the album with a sigh, the sting of that moment still sharp. The Venice trip was just one example of Sarah's many attempts to sabotage us. From the day James brought me home to meet his family, she had made her disdain for me clear. She dismissed me with backhanded compliments and pointed remarks about my upbringing, my appearance, and even my ambitions. Over the years, her behavior only became more aggressive. I wasn't alone in dealing with her controlling ways. James's older brother, John, had endured it too. He'd married Emma, a strong-willed woman who refused to let Sarah dictate their lives. The tension between them had grown until John decided to distance himself from Sarah altogether. Emma became a lifeline for me during those times, someone who truly understood what it was like to navigate Sarah's toxic presence. She reminded me that standing up to Sarah was possible, even if it wasn't easy. One evening, after yet another exhausting call from Sarah, I turned to James, my frustration bubbling over. "Why do you always let her do this?" I asked, pacing the kitchen. He leaned against the counter, rubbing his temples. "You know how she is, Emily. She thinks she's helping." "Helping?" I said incredulously. "By criticizing every choice we make? By belittling me at every turn?" James looked defensive, his tone softening. "I'm not saying it's right, but she's my mom. She worries about me."
"She doesn't worry about you," I snapped.
"She worries about losing control over you." The argument ended there, but the tension lingered. I knew James loved his mother, but I was starting to see that his loyalty was blinding him to the damage she was causing. Even so, I kept trying to keep the peace. At family gatherings, I bit my tongue and smiled politely while Sarah made endless critiques. When it came to planning our wedding, I made the mistake of including her, hoping it would help her feel involved. Instead, it turned into a nightmare. Sarah called my vintage theme tacky and tried to override every decision James and I made. The final straw came on our wedding day. Sarah showed up in a white, lacy dress that could have easily been mistaken for a bridal gown. Furious, I didn't even have time to confront her. My maid of honor and best friend stepped in, offering Sarah a pale blue dress I had secretly purchased for this exact scenario. Sarah accepted it begrudgingly, claiming she had no idea her dress would cause an issue. It was moments like these that tested my patience, but I endured them for James's sake. Over time, I began finding my voice. I started setting boundaries with Sarah, though she ignored most of them. James, despite his love for me, struggled to confront her fully. He rationalized her actions, saying her controlling tendencies were rooted in love. I wasn't convinced. Everything changed when I found out I was pregnant. James and I were overjoyed. I imagined a bright future for our growing family, and for a brief moment, I hoped the news might soften Sarah. James insisted on telling her immediately, even though I hesitated. Her reaction crushed that hope. A baby? Already? Don't you think you're rushing things, she said sharply. Her skepticism quickly turned into outright hostility. She accused me of trapping James with a child and even questioned whether the baby was his. The words stunned me. While her dramatic outbursts weren't new, this was a new low. James tried to defend me, but I could see her words had left a mark on him too. For weeks, Sarah bombarded us with calls, alternating between scathing insults and tearful pleas. I hoped she would come around, but her behavior only escalated. Then one evening, Sarah arrived at our home unannounced. She carried a bag of baby gifts and wore a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. James seemed relieved, interpreting her gesture as a sign of acceptance. I wasn't so sure. Emily, dear, she said sweetly, handing me a mug of tea later that evening. I made this for you. It'll help you relax. You should be careful with all the stress. It's not good for the baby. I accepted the mug hesitantly, my instincts screaming that something wasn't right. Sarah sat across from me, her eyes watching every movement as James sipped his own tea. Max, our playful retriever, trotted into the room. As I lifted the mug to my lips, Max sniffed it curiously. Before I could react, he knocked it over, lapping at the spilled tea on the floor.
Max,
I exclaimed, pulling him away. But it was too late. For a moment, Sarah's expression faltered, her smile slipping. She quickly recovered, forcing a laugh. Oh, silly dog. My heart raced as I cleaned up the mess, unease prickling at the back of my mind. At first, Max seemed fine, but within an hour, he began showing signs of distress. He whimpered and staggered, leaving James and me no choice but to rush him to the vet. As we waited anxiously in the clinic, the vet's somber words confirmed my worst fears. We found traces of a substance in Max's system, he explained. It could have been ingested from something he ate or drank. He's stable for now, but this could have been serious. A chill ran down my spine. I thought about the tea, Sarah's strange behavior, and the peculiar carton I'd seen earlier in the kitchen. Could it be? When we returned home, I confronted Sarah. What did you put in the tea? I demanded, my voice shaking. Her face turned pale, but she quickly masked it with indignation. How dare you accuse me of something like that? James, standing between us, looked confused and torn. Mom, what's going on? I didn't back down. Max could have died, Sarah. I want the truth. The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of my accusation hanging in the air. I did nothing wrong, she finally said, her voice trembling. But I wasn't convinced. And, judging by James's expression, neither was he. The seeds of doubt had been planted. I couldn't shake the unease gnawing at me after Max's close call. The tea, Sarah's suspicious behavior, and the strange carton in the pantry kept replaying in my mind. I knew in my gut that it wasn't just an innocent coincidence. Sarah was lying. Even though James hadn't said much, the look in his eyes told me he was starting to believe it too. The following days were tense. Sarah's calls to James became relentless, alternating between tearful pleas and angry accusations. I could see how conflicted he was. Each conversation drained him, but he couldn't bring himself to block her entirely. Meanwhile, I felt trapped, knowing something had to be done but lacking the proof to confront her fully. Then, a week later, while tidying up the kitchen, I noticed something tucked behind the cereal boxes. My heart skipped a beat as I pulled out a small carton. It wasn't our usual oat milk, and the partially torn label revealed it wasn't milk at all. It was a liquid supplement with ingredients I didn't recognize. My hands trembled as I turned it over, trying to make sense of it. James, I called, my voice shaking. He rushed in, concern etched across his face. What is it? I held up the carton.
This.
She brought this into our house. He took it from me, frowning as he examined it. What is this? I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. But it's not oat milk. And it's not something we would have bought. The realization hit James like a freight train. His expression darkened as he stared at the carton. You think this is what she put in the tea? I'm almost certain, I said. We need to find out what it is. Determined to get answers, we took the carton to a local lab for testing. The waiting felt endless, but when the results came back a few days later, they confirmed our worst fears. The liquid contained a substance that wasn't immediately deadly but could cause severe harm in significant quantities, especially to someone pregnant or with a weakened immune system. I sat in stunned silence, staring at the report in my hands. "She did this," I whispered. "She tried to hurt me. And the baby?" James was quiet for a long moment before he spoke, his voice low and filled with anger. "I can't believe this. My own mother." I reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "She's not the person you thought she was, James. I'm so sorry. But we need to act now, before she does something worse." Confronting Sarah wasn't something I wanted to do alone, and thankfully, James agreed. We reached out to John. Knowing his history with Sarah gave him valuable perspective. He agreed to join us, bringing Emma along for support. The four of us sat waiting in the living room when Sarah arrived. Her surprise at seeing John and Emma was evident, but she quickly masked it with her usual confidence. "What's going on?" she asked, her eyes darting between us. "Sit down, Mom," James said, his voice steady but firm. "We need to talk." She hesitated before taking a seat, her posture defensive. I sat across from her, clutching the lab report tightly. My heart pounded as James began. "We found this," he said, holding up the carton. "It was in our pantry. The lab tested it. Do you want to explain why you brought it into our home?" Sarah's face paled, but she quickly recovered, feigning ignorance. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, Mom," James said, his voice rising. "We know what it is. We know what it could have done." For a brief moment, her facade cracked. Panic flashed across her face, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She straightened her shoulders and said, "I was trying to protect you." Her voice trembled with indignation. "Emily is changing you, James. She's taking you away from me. I had to do something." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Anger surged through me as I leaned forward. "You are willing to hurt your own grandchild to protect him? Do you even hear yourself?" Sarah's tears began to flow, but they felt rehearsed. She turned to James, her voice breaking. "I did it for you. Don't you see that? She's manipulating you, just like Emma manipulated John." John shot to his feet, his face red with anger. "That's enough, Mom. You've been doing this for years, and we're done letting you control us." James's expression was a mixture of heartbreak and fury as he stood. "You've crossed a line, Mom. I can't forgive this. I won't." Sarah's sobs grew louder, but they didn't sway him. He reached for my hand, and together, we left the room. As the door closed behind us, I felt a wave of relief. It wasn't over yet, but it was a start. We had taken the first step toward protecting our family and reclaiming our peace. Later that evening, James sat on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. Max lay at his feet, a quiet reminder of what we'd almost lost. I joined him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Talk to me," I urged softly. He sighed deeply, his voice thick with emotion. "How did it come to this, Em? She's my mom. She raised me. How could she?" "I know this isn't easy," I said gently. "But what she did, there's no excuse for it. She put her child at risk. And Max. She crossed a line, and we can't let her back in." James turned to me, his expression filled with guilt. "I feel like I failed. I let her treat you this way for so long because I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to believe it." I cupped his face in my hands, forcing him to meet my eyes. "You didn't fail, James. You saw the truth when it mattered most. And now, we take the steps to make sure she can't hurt us again." The first thing we did was change the locks on the house. By the afternoon, I finally felt a sense of security, knowing Sarah no longer had access to our home. We also blocked her number and informed close family and friends about what had happened. John and Emma were fully supportive, though they warned us about Sarah's potential retaliation. "She'll try to manipulate everyone she can," John said during a call. "She'll twist the story to make herself the victim. Be ready for that." James sighed. "She's been doing that my whole life, hasn't she? I just didn't see it." John's tone softened. We both wanted to believe the best about her. But at some point you have to protect the people who matter most. James thanked him, though I could see the mix of gratitude and regret on his face. There was no undoing the past, but I hoped he understood we were moving forward, together. As the days passed, Sarah's attempts to reconnect with us became more desperate. Word trickled down through family members that she was spinning a new story, claiming she was the victim of misunderstandings and unfair treatment. But this time, her words carried little weight. Everyone now knew the truth. To my relief, most of the family sided with James and me. Even John, who had distanced himself from Sarah years ago, remained resolute. "She's only doing this because she's lost her grip on us," he told James during a phone call. "Don't let her guilt you into letting her back in." James agreed, though I could see how hard it was for him. Guilt had been a constant presence in his life, ingrained by Sarah over the years. Still, he reminded himself of the danger she had posed, not just to me, but to our unborn child. The final test of our resolve came one crisp autumn afternoon. I was 8 months pregnant, and we'd spent the day running errands and picking up last-minute baby supplies. As we pulled into the driveway, my stomach dropped at the sight of a figure sitting on our porch. It was Sarah. James parked the car and immediately turned to me. "Stay here," he said, his jaw tightening. "I'll handle this." I nodded, though my heart was pounding. Watching him step out of the car and approach her filled me with both dread and relief. This was his moment to draw the line. "James," Sarah said, her voice trembling as she stood. She looked thinner, her hair unkempt. For a moment, she almost seemed fragile. "I just wanted to talk. Please." "There's nothing to talk about, Mom," James replied, his tone cold but steady. "You're not welcome here." "James, I've changed," she pleaded, her eyes filling with tears. "I know I made mistakes, but I've been working on myself. I want to make things right." James crossed his arms, unmoved. "Working on yourself doesn't undo what you did. You put Emily and our baby in danger, and that's something I'll never forgive." Her tears dried as quickly as they had appeared, replaced by a hardened expression. "She's poisoned you against me, hasn't she? That girl has ruined our family." "Stop," James snapped, his voice rising. "This isn't about Emily. This is about you and the choices you made. You need to leave." But Sarah didn't budge. "James, I'm your mother. You can't just cut me out of your life. Family doesn't do that to each other." James shook his head, his voice resolute. "Family protects each other. Family doesn't manipulate, control, or hurt. You need to leave, Mom."
Now.
Realizing she wasn't getting through to him, Sarah turned her gaze toward the car. I could feel her eyes on me even from the distance. She took a step toward the driveway, but James quickly stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "Don't," he warned, his voice low and firm. For a moment, Sarah looked at him with a mix of anger and sadness. Then, with a defeated slump of her shoulders, she muttered, "You're going to regret this," before turning and walking away. James stood there, watching until she was out of sight. When he finally returned to the car, I reached for his hand as he slid into the driver's seat. "Are you okay?" I asked softly. He nodded, though his face was somber. "I am. For the first time, I think I really am." The weeks that followed were quiet, and for the first time in years, we felt a sense of peace. Sarah didn't make any further attempts to contact us, and we threw ourselves into preparing for the baby's arrival. We finalized the nursery, attended parenting classes, and leaned on each other in ways we never had before. When our daughter Lily was born, it was the happiest moment of our lives. Holding her tiny, perfect form in my arms filled me with a love I had never known. James sat beside me, his eyes shining with tears as he kissed her forehead. Max, ever our loyal companion, wagged his tail excitedly whenever he was near her, as though he understood how special she was. Life as new parents brought its own challenges, but it also brought clarity. James and I made a promise to each other that we would create a safe, loving environment for Lily, one free from the toxicity that had once loomed over our lives. This was our chance to build something new, and we weren't going to waste it. Months later, We heard through family that Sarah had moved out of town. Rumors swirled that she was struggling financially and had taken a job at a superstore to make ends meet. The news saddened James, but he felt no urge to reach out. For him, it was a stark reminder of the consequences of her actions. As for me, I felt closure. I had tried to build a bridge with Sarah, but there came a point when I realized that some relationships were beyond repair. My focus now is on the family James and I were building together, a family rooted in trust, respect, and love. One evening, as we sat on the couch with Lily sleeping soundly in her crib, James reached for my hand. His expression was tender, his voice thick with emotion as he said, "Thank you for everything, for standing by me when I didn't deserve it, for being the best partner and mother I could ever ask for." Tears pricked my eyes as I smiled at him. "We've been through a lot, James, but we made it through together. That's what matters." Max rested his head on my lap, his tail thumping gently against the floor. The soft sound of Lily's breathing filled the room, a comforting reminder of how far we'd come. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt truly at peace. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew we could face them together.